The dust came first. It always did on Calder's Rest. Before any real weather arrived, the dust moved, thin orange clouds that crept along the ground and slipped under doors and settled on every flat surface in the colony. Old settlers called it the planet breathing. Reed Calloway called it annoying and kept a cloth tucked in his coat pocket for wiping down his equipment. He was in the middle of wrapping a miner's broken finger when the lights flickered. The clinic was small, 2 rooms, a storage shelf, a cot, and a folding chair Reed used when patients needed someone to sit with them through the night. He had built most of it himself 3 years ago when the colony assigned him here. Nobody else wanted the post. Calder's Rest was at the edge of settled space, far from anything important, full of dust and hard people who only came to see him when something was truly wrong. He did not mind. He was not a man who needed noise around him. The miner, a broad, weathered woman named Doss, looked up at the ceiling when the lights flickered a second time. "Iron storm," she said, like she was commenting on the weather at a picnic. "Hold still," Reed said, and kept rapping. She held still, the lights steadied. Outside, the wind picked up and threw a handful of grit against the clinic window hard enough to sound like small stones. Reed finished the rap, told Doss to keep it dry for a week, and watched her pull her boot back on and walk out into the orange air without another word. That was Doss. That was most people here. Reed cleaned his hands, capped his supply case, and stood at the window for a moment. The sky had gone the color of rust. The iron storms came through this region every few months, thrown off by the system's unstable second moon. They were not dangerous to people on the ground. They knocked out communications for a few hours, sometimes longer. They scattered anything in orbit and played havoc with navigation systems. Ships avoided this region when storm warnings went out. Reed had not heard a warning today, but the storms rarely announced themselves politely. He ate a small meal standing at his counter, some dried grain and canned protein, the kind of food that kept forever and tasted like it knew that about itself, and then went to check the door seals. The clinic had been here long enough that the seals were not perfect. Dust got in anyway. He did it out of habit more than hope. He pushed the front door open to check the outer seal, and the wind hit him immediately, warm and gritty, pulling at his coat. He squinted against it. The settlement was quiet. Most people had gone inside. A few structures down, someone had left a cargo net flapping loose, and it snapped in the wind like a slow flag. Reed was about to pull his door shut when something moved at the edge of his vision. Not wind, not a tumbleweed or a scrap of fabric, something low to the ground and slow, coming from the direction of the eastern ridge. He kept his eyes on it because it did not move the way debris moved. It had intention in it, even if that intention was small and exhausted and barely holding together. He stepped outside. The shape resolved as it came closer. Small, 4-limbed, but moving on 2 and dragging the others. Scales, he could see the glint of them even through the dust haze, deep purple, the color of a bruise, a long tail dragging behind it, a head that was too large for the body, the way young things often were, with a crest of short spines that lay completely flat against the skull. Reed had seen pictures of dragon young. Every medic in the frontier colonies had to go through a basic xenobiology brief when they were assigned this close to the border. He had looked at the images, read the notes, passed the assessment, and quietly assumed he would never need any of it. He started walking toward the creature. It heard him or sensed him and stopped. The head came up. 2 eyes, pale gold with vertical pupils, found his face through the dust and wind. The creature was trembling, not from cold, the night was warm, from fear or pain or both. Along its left side, just below the joint of the wing buds, there was a dark streak where the scales were wrong, broken, some of them, and wet. Reed slowed his steps. He crouched down to make himself smaller. The creature stared at him. He stared back. He had no idea what to say to a dragon child. He did not know if it could understand him. He tried anyway because silence felt wrong. "Hey," he said, "you're hurt." The creature made a sound, low, short, rough around the edges, like a question being asked in a language without words. Its legs buckled slightly. It caught itself, but barely. Reed did not think very hard about what happened next. That was the thing about him that Lena would try to explain to the Dragon Empire later and never quite manage to put into proper terms. Reed Calloway did not have a long internal debate about risks and implications and interstellar politics. He saw something small and hurt and frightened, and his body was already moving before his mind caught up. He crossed the distance, got down on one knee in the orange dust, and opened his hands palms up, low and slow, the way you approached anything afraid. The creature looked at his hands, it looked at his face. Then it made a decision that would change the shape of the galaxy, though neither of them knew that yet. It moved forward the last few steps, pressed its face against Reed's coat, and made the sound again. Quieter this time, still a question, but softer, like maybe it was starting to think the answer might be yes. Reed put one arm around it very carefully, feeling the warmth of it, the fast flutter of its breathing, the way it trembled, and then, very slowly, trembled a little less. He got to his feet and carried it inside, out of the wind and dust. He put it on the cot. He got his kit. He found the wound on its side and understood immediately that it had bled significantly before something had partially sealed the surface. Biological response, probably. The tissue was still inflamed, and the creature flinched hard when he touched near it, but did not bite him, did not lash out. It watched him with those pale gold eyes while he worked, and after a while it stopped trembling. He was halfway through cleaning the wound when he heard the crunch of boots on the path outside, and Lena's voice came through the door without knocking, the way it always did. "Reed, storm knocked out my external antenna. I need to borrow your—" She pushed inside and stopped. She looked at the cot. She looked at what was on the cot. Then she looked at Reed. "What," she said very carefully, "is that?" "Patient," Reed said. Lena was a xenobiologist. She studied alien life for a living. She was not a person who scared easily or said dramatic things. She walked slowly to the cot and looked at the creature from close up, and the color left her face in a way Reed had not seen before. "Reed," she said, "that's a dragon hatchling." "I know." "Do you know what dragon hatchlings mean? Do you know whose that might be?" "No, but it's hurt, Lena. Look at the wound." She looked at the wound. Her jaw tightened. She pulled a stool over and sat down and did not say anything for almost a full minute. Then she said, quietly, "The Dragon Empire does not lose its young. When they find out where this one is," she stopped. "What?" "They will not send a polite message first, Reed." Reed was already applying a clean dressing to the wound, working gently around the broken scales. The hatchling had gone very still under his hands, watching him, its breathing slower now. "Okay," he said, "we can worry about that part later." Lena pressed her hands together and stared at him. "You are the most frustrating person I have ever met." Reed did not answer. He was focused on the dressing. The hatchling blinked its pale gold eyes at him once, slow and long, and then let out a small breath and rested its chin on the edge of the cot. Outside, the iron storm moved through the settlement and kept going, and the sky darkened, and somewhere in the black above it all, 3 lights that had not been there yesterday appeared in orbit and began to move in a slow, deliberate arc toward Calder's Rest. Lena saw them first, through the clinic window. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at the hatchling on the cot and at Reed sitting beside it, and she quietly decided that she was going to need a much stronger drink than anything she currently had. 40 light-years away, in a hall carved from black stone and lit by fires that had not been allowed to go out in 300 years, a door opened. The hall was the inner chamber of the Dragon Empire's seat of power, not the kind of place that had a simple name. Because the Drathi did not name places that were simply understood, everyone knew what it was. Everyone knew what it meant when the matriarch sat in it. She was sitting in it now, in a chair that was more like a throne and less like anything a human would recognize as furniture, and the messenger who entered moved the way things moved when they understood that the wrong word at the wrong moment could end a career, a lineage, or a life. High Matriarch Velos was ancient, not old the way humans measured old. Ancient the way certain mountains were ancient, changed by nothing, worn smooth by everything, still present long after the things around her had ground down to dust. Her scales were deep grey-green, darker at the spine, and her eyes were the color of amber held up to firelight. She had ruled the Dragon Empire for longer than most human civilizations had existed. She looked at the messenger and said nothing. "Matriarch," the messenger said. "The young one, the one lost in transit during the Iron Storm event near the border region, has been located." Velos waited. "She is alive. She appears to be uninjured. She is currently in the care of a human." The fire in the nearest brazier made a sound. Velos did not. "Which human?" she said at last. Her voice was low and even, the way the surface of deep water was even. "A medical worker, a frontier colony called Calder's Rest. He appears to have found her after the storm passed. He treated a wound she sustained during the transit incident." Velos was quiet for a moment. "How long has she been with him?" "Approximately 11 hours, matriarch." She stood. The room felt smaller when she stood. "Send Draven, tell him to take 3 ships. Tell him I want the matter resolved quietly." She paused. "And tell him no harm comes to the colony, not one building, not one person." The messenger bowed and left quickly. Velos stood facing the fire for a long time after the door closed. Her grandchild, 11 hours, with a human. She did not know what that meant yet. She intended to find out. On Calder's Rest, Reed had been awake for most of those 11 hours. The hatchling slept in short stretches, woke, checked that Reed was still there, and slept again. The wound on her side was clean and dressed, and Reed was reasonably confident it would not get worse, though he had called up every piece of xenobiology data Lena had on her personal drive and read all of it twice while the little creature dozed. Dragon hatchlings were not exactly like human children in their needs, but they were not completely unlike them either. Warmth, quiet, consistency, presence. Reed had those things. His clinic was warm. He was quiet by nature. He stayed. Lena came back in the early morning with 2 cups of something hot and a look on her face that meant she had been thinking hard and had not liked most of her conclusions. "The iron storm broke up a Drathi convoy," she said, handing him a cup and sitting in the folding chair. "Routine transit, 3 ships. The storm scattered them, 2 regrouped on the far side of the system. 1 broke apart." She stopped. "And the hatchling was on the one that broke apart," Reed said. "In a life pod, the pod auto-ejected when the hull stress hit critical. It must have caught a trajectory from the ejection, came down through the atmosphere, landed somewhere east of here, and she walked the rest." Lena looked at the sleeping hatchling. She walked several kilometers, Reed, hurt, alone, in an iron storm, on a planet she'd never been on. Reed looked at the small creature on his cot. The crest spines were relaxed now, lying easy instead of flat with fear. The tail was curled around itself. Her breathing was steady. "She's tough," he said. "She's a dragon," Lena said, "but yes." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "The Empire knows. They have to know by now. They track their ships. They will have found the debris and followed the trajectory. Draven will be here by tonight." "Draven." "Commander Draven, Velos's enforcer. He is not a diplomatic person, Reed." "What does he do when he's not being diplomatic?" Lena's expression did a complicated thing. "He resolves situations, quietly." Reed nodded slowly. He looked at his cup for a moment. Then he looked at the hatchling again, and something changed in the timing of the conversation. A small gap opened up, the kind that comes before someone says something they have been sitting with for a while. "She said something earlier," he said, "while you were gone." Lena frowned. "What do you mean?" She spoke. "1 word, maybe not a word. It was small, raspy." He turned the cup in his hands. It sounded like duh. Lena was very still. "I told her I wasn't her dad," he said. She said it again. Lena set her cup down on the floor with great care, the kind of care people used when they were making sure they did not break something. She looked at the hatchling. She looked at Reed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said, "You know what Drathi imprinting is? I read about it in your files, some of it. It is biological, Reed. It is not a phase. It is not temporary confusion. Drathi hatchlings, in their first days in a new environment, in a state of fear or trauma, will sometimes form a primary bond with whoever is present and consistent. She said the next part very carefully. You were present, you were consistent, you were warm and calm, and you stayed. Reed said nothing. You are right now the most important person in that hatchling's life, not by choice, not by ceremony, by biology. Lena picked her cup back up. The Dragon Empire is going to arrive here tonight, and they are going to see that, and I genuinely do not know what happens after that. The hatchling stirred on the cot. Her eyes opened, pale gold in the low morning light. She looked around the room for one slow second, and then her eyes found Reed, and the crest spines along her skull rose slightly, not in alarm, in the way they did when something settled. She made a small sound, not the frightened question from the storm, something quieter than that, something with an answer already in it. Reed put down his cup and went to sit beside the cot, and the hatchling shifted and put one small claw over the back of his hand and went back to sleep. Lena watched this from her chair and said nothing. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten to its usual pale orange. In a few hours, it would be full day. In a few hours after that, the dragon fleet would come. Whatever was going to happen would happen. That was the thing about Calder's Rest. Events here did not wait for people to be ready. They arrived with the dust, without warning, and you dealt with them as they came. Reed sat with the hatchling's claw on his hand and let the morning come. 3 ships in orbit. That was what Lena's sensor relay showed when she wired it back together after the storm damage. She had built the relay herself from spare parts and a second-hand atmospheric scanner, and it was not pretty, but it worked. And right now, it was showing her 3 shapes in low orbit above Calder's Rest that were each roughly the size of a small mountain, and none of which was supposed to be there. She walked to the clinic and did not knock. "They're here," she said. Reed looked up from the cot where he was sitting, a data pad on his knee, the hatchling asleep with her head resting on his leg. He was reviewing Lena's notes on Drathi nutritional requirements for young in the first developmental stage, and he had a look on his face that she had learned to read as him being somewhere in the middle of a problem. "How many?" he said. 3 big ones. Lena went to the window and looked at the sky as if she could see them. She could not, they were too high up, but knowing they were there made the sky feel different, heavier. They're not broadcasting a signal yet. That's actually bad. A ship broadcasting a signal is a ship that wants to talk. Silent ships are. The comm unit on Reed's counter made a sound, a single, flat tone, then it made it again. "That's a Drathi hailing frequency," Lena said. She had gone very still. "They're requesting a channel." "Open it," Reed said. "Reed." "Open it, Lena." She crossed to the counter and opened the channel, and the room filled with a voice that sounded nothing like human voices. Drathi voices had layers to them, a surface tone, and something deeper running underneath it, like 2 instruments playing the same note from different distances. The voice that came through the comm was cold and even and gave no opening pleasantries. "This is Commander Draven of the Drathi Sovereignty. You are in possession of an individual belonging to the Dragon Empire. You will surrender them immediately and without condition. Non-compliance will require escalation." Lena translated this for Reed in a fast whisper, though he had caught most of the tone without needing the words. Reed set his data pad down. He looked at the hatchling. She was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling, one claw hooked loosely over the edge of the cot. He looked at the comm unit. He reached over and pressed the transmit key. "Commander Draven," he said, "my name is Reed Calloway. I'm a medic. The child you're looking for is here. She's safe, she's sleeping, and her wound is healing. I'd be happy to talk about next steps. Can I ask who else is on your ship right now?" Lena's eyes went wide. She made a motion with her hand that clearly meant do not do that. Reed kept his eyes on the comm. The pause before Draven spoke again was long enough to mean something. "That information is not relevant to this communication." "With respect," Reed said, "it is. If there's a family member on those ships, her family, I'd like them on the call. because what I'm going to say is easier to explain once, and it's the kind of thing family should hear. Another pause, longer. Draven's voice came back, and the lower undertone of it had shifted very slightly, though Lena could not say exactly how. State what you intend to say. Reed leaned back in his chair. She arrived in a storm, injured and alone. She found me. I treated a wound on her left side, broken scales, tissue damage, some bleeding. She's been here for about 16 hours now. She's stable. She's been eating, which took some improvisation on my end because I didn't have Drathi-appropriate food in my kit, but we figured it out. She's not scared anymore. He paused. That last part matters. She was very scared when she got here. She's not now. I'd like whoever comes to get her to understand that before they come in loud and fast. The comm was silent for so long that Lena thought the channel had dropped. Then Draven said, "You are requesting we do not frighten the child." "I'm requesting you don't undo the last 16 hours of work," Reed said. "Yes." Somewhere in the Dragon fleet, 3 ships held still in orbit and said nothing to each other on external channels, though what was happening on internal channels was a different matter entirely. Draven had been a commander for over 60 years. He had managed border disputes, extraction operations, and 3 separate armed conflicts. He had never, in any of those situations, been told by a human medic on a frontier colony to please be quiet so as not to wake a child. He did not know what to say. First Speaker Orath was watching the exchange on a relay feed from the capital. He was the Empire's oldest living diplomat, and he had seen a great many first contacts over the centuries. He leaned forward in his chair now and watched the comm readout and said nothing, but the tip of his tail moved once, the way it did when something caught his attention. Draven composed himself. "We will send a shuttle to your surface. You will present the hatchling." "I'll be here," Reed said. "Come to the building with the blue-painted door. It's the only one that has one. I'll put a light on." He released the transmit key. Lena stared at him. She stared at him for a full 10 seconds without speaking. "What?" Reed said. "You told a Dragon military commander to come find you by the blue door. It's the easiest landmark. The settlement isn't big." Lena pressed both palms flat on the counter and took a careful breath. "Reed, Draven is going to walk through that door with soldiers. He is going to expect to find evidence of exploitation or manipulation or some kind of scheme. That is what he is trained to find. That is the lens he is going to use." "Then he won't find it," Reed said, "because it isn't there." He looked at the hatchling again. She had shifted in her sleep, turned slightly, pressed her nose against his knee. He reached over without thinking about it and rested 2 fingers gently between her crest spines, the place she seemed to like, and she made a small sound and settled. Lena watched this happen. She pulled her chair over and sat down and looked at the ceiling. "You know what the hardest part of this is," she said. "Tell me." "You're not even trying to make a good impression. You're not thinking about what it looks like. You're just being you. And somehow that is the most disarming thing you could possibly be doing right now." Reed did not have an answer to that. He went back to the data pad and his notes on Drathi nutrition. Outside, a shuttle separated from the largest of the 3 ships in orbit and began its descent through the pale orange atmosphere, carrying Commander Draven and 8 soldiers and a set of expectations that were about to be quietly, completely, and permanently dismantled. Reed put a light on above the blue door. He sat back down next to the cot. The hatchling slept on. The shuttle landed at the edge of the settlement in a flat clearing that the colony used to store equipment. It was not a grand landing. There was no ceremony to it. The dust rose and settled, and the ramp came down, and Draven walked out into the orange light of Calder's Rest and looked at the place where the most unusual situation of his career had decided to happen. It was small. He had known it would be small, a frontier colony, a border world, nothing significant by any measure of the Empire's cartography, but knowing and seeing were different. The buildings were low and practical. The paths between them were not paved, just worn down by feet over years. There was a smell to the air that was mineral and dry, and a wind that pushed dust in lazy circles. It was the kind of place that asked nothing of the universe and expected nothing in return. Draven was flanked by 8 soldiers in full Drathi tactical armor, polished grey-black with the sovereignty's sigil at the shoulder. They moved the way trained soldiers moved, eyes scanning, formation tight, ready. He looked for the blue door. It was not hard to find. One building, slightly larger than the others, with a faded blue door and a light above it that glowed steady warm yellow in the afternoon air. No other markings, no guards, nothing to indicate that behind it was a situation that had caused 3 warships to divert from their route and an empire to hold its breath. Draven stopped at the door. He raised one hand and knocked. The door opened. Reed Calloway looked at him. Reed Calloway looked at the 8 soldiers. He stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," he said. "She's awake." Draven entered. His soldiers filed in around the edges of the room and took up positions with a practiced silence that filled the small space. Their eyes went to the cot. Their eyes went to the hatchling sitting on the cot, upright now, watching the door with those pale gold eyes. The hatchling saw them. She saw the armor, the size, the formation. Her crest's spines rose, her tail pulled in close. She made a sound low in her throat that was not a happy sound. Then she turned and looked at Reed, who was closing the door calmly, and turned back, and the crest spines came down 1 degree. Draven saw this. He saw the hatchling's response to his soldiers, and then her response to the human, and he filed both things away in the part of his mind that was still processing and had not yet concluded anything. He looked at Reed. Reed was looking back at him with an expression that was not afraid, not aggressive, not particularly impressed, just present, just waiting for whatever was going to happen next. "Commander Draven," Reed said. "I'm Reed Calloway. Can I offer you anything?" Lena made something. "It might not suit your biology, but the gesture stands." From across the room, Lena held up a tray with a very slight expression that suggested she had not entirely expected to be introduced this way. Draven said, "Where is the medical log?" Here, Reed picked up a data pad from the counter without any hesitation and held it out. "Everything I did, start to finish, every decision and why I made it. My equipment was not designed for Drathi patients, so I had to improvise in a few places. I documented that too." Draven took the pad. He did not read it yet. He looked at it in his hand, and then he looked at the hatchling. He crossed the room and crouched down, which was not a small movement for a dragon of his size. He looked at the hatchling at eye level. She looked back at him. She was very still. Then slowly she moved not toward him, to the side, toward Reed's position. She stopped when her side was pressed against Reed's leg, and she stood there, watching Draven with her crest half raised. Draven looked at this. He looked at it for a long time. "She knows you," he said to Reed. Not an accusation, more like something he was confirming. "We've had time together," Reed said. "She's been through a lot. New places, new people. I'm trying to keep things consistent for her." "You know what an imprint is," Draven said. Lena explained it. "And you know she has imprinted on you." "Yes." "And you did not," he paused, and what was behind the pause was a full sentence that he was choosing not to say, something about intent and motive, and the suspicion that had ridden with him all the way down through the atmosphere. "I didn't do anything," Reed said. "I found her in a storm, hurt and alone. I brought her inside and treated her wound. I stayed with her, that's all." Draven stood. He was very tall when he stood. He looked at the data pad in his hand, and this time he did read it. He read it slowly. Lena watched him read it. The soldiers stood very still around the edges of the room. The log was thorough, that was the first thing. Temperature readings taken every 2 hours through the night. Notes on the wound with sketches of the scale damage and the tissue repair. A section titled, in Reed's plain and slightly tired handwriting, Feeding Attempts and Results, which detailed 6 different food combinations tried and whether the hatchling had accepted them. A note that said, "She seemed distressed around the 2nd hour. I sat closer. That seemed to help." Then another note near the end, "Sleeping steadily now, seems less scared." Draven read that last line and said nothing. He kept reading. The soldiers behind him kept waiting. The hatchling pressed a little more firmly against Reed's leg, and Reed rested a hand on her crest without looking down, the way you did things you had done enough times that they did not require thought anymore. Draven reached the last entry. He lowered the pad. He looked at Reed for a long moment. He looked at his soldiers. He looked at the hatchling and then at Reed's hand resting between her spines. "You stayed awake," he said, "the whole first night." "She had a fever around the 4th hour. I wasn't going to sleep through that." "You had no obligation," Draven said, not an argument, more like a thing he was trying to understand. "She was a sick child alone in a strange place," Reed said. "What would you have done?" The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved dust across the path. One of the soldiers in the back of the room shifted his weight very slightly, and Draven knew without looking that it was soldier instinct, not threat response. Something else, something harder to name. He transmitted to the fleet, to Velos. He sent the log and a brief summary and one line of his own observation that he had not planned to add and that surprised him as he wrote it. The line said, "This human kept her alive and kept her calm and kept records of every hour of it. Request guidance." The answer came back in 11 minutes, which was fast by any measure of Imperial communication. It said, "I am coming myself. Have them wait." Draven looked at the message. He read it twice. Then he looked at Reed Calloway, who was now sitting on the floor of his small clinic, because the hatchling had decided that was where she wanted to sit, and it was apparently easier than arguing with her, and was listening patiently while Lena read aloud from a xenobiology reference and tried to help him understand what the hatchling was communicating with a particular tail position. He had no idea that the matriarch was coming. He did not look like someone who would have been impressed by the fact even if he did. Draven put the data pad down on the counter very gently and waited with the rest of them for what was coming next. There was a moment, just before the second shuttle landed, when Calder's rest went completely quiet. It was not an absence of sound exactly. The wind was still moving. Somewhere in the settlement, a door was creaking on its hinges, but the people who had stepped outside to see what was happening, the miners, the traders, the handful of families who had built their lives on this dust-covered rock at the edge of known space, all of them stopped moving at the same moment, because the shuttle that came down was not like Draven's shuttle. It was black, not the dark gray of military ships. Black the way deep space was black, with a surface that did not catch light cleanly, but instead seemed to hold it for a moment and release it slowly. The sigil on its side was not the standard sovereignty mark. It was older than that. The original seal of the Dragon Empire, the kind that appeared on history documents and in museums and in the oldest parts of the Empire's stone halls. Draven, standing outside the clinic, looked at the shuttle and straightened without meaning to. His soldiers had already come to attention before he said anything. Lena appeared at the clinic door and said, "Reed, you need to come outside." Reed came outside. He was carrying the hatchling because she had decided some time ago that being held was preferable to most other options, and Reed had stopped arguing about it. He stood in the orange afternoon light and looked at the black shuttle settling into the clearing and said, "Who is that?" "That," Lena said very carefully, "is Velos." Reed looked at her. "The matriarch," Lena said, "the head of the Dragon Empire, the oldest living Drathi. The Reed, that is the person who rules 40 star systems and has done so for 300 years. Reed looked at the shuttle. He looked at the hatchling, who was looking at the shuttle too with an expression that had gone still and large-eyed. "She came herself," he said. "She came herself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay," and stood where he was and waited. The ramp came down. The escort that walked out first was silent and precise and wore black with the old sigil, and they arranged themselves with the kind of practiced ease that meant they had done this for a very long time. Then Velos came down. She was not as large as Draven. She was older than him in every way that age showed on a Drathi, the dark deepening of the scales, the measured economy of each movement, the complete absence of any need to perform authority because the authority simply was. Her eyes were the color of amber and firelight. They moved across the settlement without hurry, taking in every detail. They came to raid. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at what he was holding. The hatchling made a sound. It was a sound Draven had not heard from her before, and he had been in the clinic for several hours. It started somewhere low and rose at the end, a single note that broke slightly in the middle. Every Drathi present went still when they heard it. Even Velos went still. It was the word for grandmother in the old form, the form very young children used before they learned the formal version. Velos walked forward. She did not walk quickly. Each step was deliberate. She stopped a short distance from Reed and looked at the hatchling, and something happened in her face that Lena, watching from the doorway, had not expected to see. The absolute stillness that was Velos's natural expression did not break exactly, it did not crack or crumple, but it moved. Something behind the amber eyes moved. She lowered herself slowly to the hatchling's level. The hatchling reached out with both claws, and Velos caught them and held them, and for a moment neither of them made any sound at all. Then the hatchling turned her head. She looked at Reed. She held Velos's claws in one small grip and reached the other arm up toward Reed's collar and held that too, and she looked between them with great seriousness, the way very young things looked when they had decided something important and wanted the people around them to understand it. Velos looked up at Reed from this position, close and very direct. Reed met her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not look deferential, and he did not try to explain himself. He just looked back at her the way he looked at everything, steady and present and without pretense. Velos said, in human standard, without accent, "You kept her alive." "Yes," Reed said. "You stayed." "Yes." "Why?" It was not a complicated question, and he did not give it a complicated answer. She was hurt and scared. Staying was the right thing to do. Velos studied him. She studied him the way someone studied a thing they had been told about and were now finding to be different from the description. Not wrong, different. "She has imprinted on you," Velos said. "I know. You understand what that means for her." Lena explained it. "Separation will distress her. It will take time and care to manage it, and she'll need." "I know what she will need," Velos said, not sharply, just with the weight of someone who had known this before he said it. She rose slowly and stood at her full height again. The hatchling held both of them still. One claw on Velos, one on Reed, and did not let go. "Come inside," Reed said. "There's a chair. It's not built for your size, but I can find something." Lena made a sound in the doorway that was not quite a word. Velos looked at the door. She looked at the settlement around her, this small, dust-covered, nothing place at the edge of maps. Then she looked at Reed Calloway, who had just invited the ruler of 40 star systems to sit in his clinic on a folding chair because that was what was available. She went inside. They sat Velos on the stool Reed dragged out, which was too small, but she said nothing about it, and Reed in the folding chair with the hatchling in his lap, and Lena stood near the counter and tried to be invisible. Draven stood in the doorway and watched. Velos asked questions. Reed answered them. She asked about the night of the storm, the wound, the fever, the feeding. He answered everything directly and without embellishment. When she asked why he had not contacted authorities immediately, he said, "The storm took out our long-range comms. By the time they came back up, she'd been with me for 8 hours, and I didn't want to hand her off to a shuttle crew and have her alone with strangers again." When she asked if he had considered what the political implications were, he said, "Not really. That's not my job. My job is the patient." Velos absorbed each answer. She asked near the end, when she said, "Duh, what did you do?" Reed looked at the hatchling. "I told her I wasn't her dad." "And she said it again." "Yes." Velos was quiet for a long time. Outside, the light was starting to angle toward evening, turning the dust in the air from orange to a deeper, redder shade. She made her decision somewhere in that quiet, not suddenly. It had been forming since she read Draven's message on the ship, since she boarded a shuttle herself for the first time in 11 years, since she walked down a ramp onto a colony world that her empire's maps barely acknowledged. It finished forming now, watching this human sit with her grandchild's small claw hooked over his thumb. She spoke to Draven in Drathi, a short sentence. Draven said nothing for a moment. Then quietly he said, "Matriarch, are you certain?" She gave him a single look. He bowed his head and reached for his comm. Velos turned back to read. She studied him one more time with those amber eyes. "There is a title in our law," she said. "It has not been given in many generations. It has never been given to a non-Drathi." She paused. "It means, in your language, something close to bonded guardian. It is what you give to the one who stayed when staying was not required." Reed looked at her. He did not say anything. "She will return to the Empire," Velos said. "She will grow there and learn there, as is right. But you," she glanced at the hatchling, who had fallen asleep again with her chin on Reed's arm, "you will not be removed from her life. The bond she has formed is real. We will not damage her by pretending it is not." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." It was such a plain thing to say, such a human thing to say. Velos had expected something else, gratitude and prostration, or political calculations dressed as relief, or some bid for advantage wrapped in courtesy. "Thank you," 2 words, meant completely. She stood, she straightened. She looked at her grandchild sleeping on a human's arm in a frontier clinic on a world nobody had ever heard of, and she thought about 300 years of certainty and what it cost to revise one piece of it. The cost, she decided, was worth it. First speaker Orath had attended many moments in his long life that would later be called historic. He had been in the room when 3 border conflicts were resolved. He had spoken before the Galactic Council at 4 separate crises. He had watched empires that seemed permanent begin to lose their certainty at the edges, slowly and then all at once. He knew what significant moments looked like, and more importantly, he knew what they felt like, the particular quality of quiet that settled over people who had just witnessed something they did not have a framework for yet. That quiet was in the Dragon Empire's High Court now. Velos had returned 2 days ago and made her announcement before the full court, which was not something she did casually. She stood at the center of the hall with its ancient fires still burning, and she told them what she had decided, that the hatchling's bond was real, that Reed Calloway was to be formally recognized as bonded guardian under the old law, that the child would be educated and raised within the Empire, and that the human would be a part of her life going forward, and that anyone who wished to debate this was welcome too, and she would hear them out, and she would not change her mind. Nobody debated it. Draven had bowed first. That was the thing Orath kept returning to. Draven, who had flown to that colony with 8 soldiers and a set of intentions that had nothing gentle in them, had come back and stood in the court and been the first to bow when Velos read out the decision. No one had expected that. People were still talking about it in corridors and on the relay channels. Now the announcement had gone out to the wider galaxy. Orath had written it himself at Velos's request, and it had taken him 3 drafts to get it right because the usual language of Imperial declarations did not quite fit. He had ended up writing something very plain. He was old enough to know that plain things lasted. In the council hall of a dozen other civilizations, in the news feeds of 100 human settlements, in the relay stations along the border that picked up official transmissions and passed them on, the news moved outward at the speed of signal. A human had been found with a dragon hatchling. He had cared for her, kept records of every hour, stayed through the fever, improvised food and warmth and presence. The Dragon Empire had sent its matriarch. The matriarch had given a human a name in their language for the first time in the recorded history of the Drathi sovereignty. The name was old. The translation was imperfect. The closest it came in human standard was the kind of person the universe keeps because the universe knows what it needs. Human worlds reacted in the way human worlds generally reacted to unexpected news, which was loudly and all at once, and in many contradictory directions simultaneously. Some people called it a political maneuver. Some called it a miracle. Most of the ones who called it a miracle were people who had, at some point in their lives, needed someone to stay when staying was not required, and knew what it was worth. On Calder's Rest, Reed did not hear the announcement until Lena knocked on the clinic door and showed him her comm screen. He read it. He read it again. He handed the comm back and went to finish restocking his supply shelf. "You are reading that correctly," Lena said. "I understand what it says. You have a name, Indrasi. You are now technically, legally, by ancient Imperial law." "Lena, what? Is there anything in your files about what Soro is going to need in the next few months? For the transition, I want to send something with her. Some notes for whoever is going to be caring for her day to day. Things she likes, things that settle her when she's upset, the way she holds her crest when she's actually frightened versus when she's just uncertain." Lena stared at him. "She's going to a new place again," Reed said. "I want whoever takes care of her to have a head start." Lena pressed her lips together very firmly. She sat down. She looked at the ceiling. "I will pull everything I have," she said. "Give me an hour." The departure was 2 days after that. Velos's ship was still in orbit. The black shuttle came down one final time, and it was smaller than before, just Velos and Orath and a small escort, because this was not a formal occasion. This was a child leaving a place she had been held safe, and the people who understood that came accordingly. Reed was at the edge of the landing clearing with Soro when they arrived. He had dressed her wound that morning. It was well healed now, the new scales growing in pale at the edges and darkening toward their natural violet, and he had combed out the loose spines of her crest with a small tool Lena had machined for exactly this purpose. Soro had sat still for it, which she did not always do, and she had held Reed's wrist the entire time. Velos walked to them and stood with them and said nothing immediately. Orath stayed back near the shuttle. The wind moved. Reed knelt down to Soro's level. He had been doing this for days, consciously, whenever something important was being said. Making sure they were at the same height. He did not know if she fully understood what was happening. He thought she understood more than he could measure. "You're going with your grandmother," he said, "to your home. It's going to be very big and very different, and there are going to be a lot of other dragons, and you are going to be okay." Soro looked at him. Her pale gold eyes moved over his face the way they did when she was memorizing something. "I'll write," he said. "Lena says Velos will make sure you get the messages, and I'm going to send notes with you for the people there so they know how to help you settle in." He paused. "You're going to be okay," he said again. Soro reached up with both claws and pressed them against either side of his face, the way she had learned that he did not find threatening, the way she did when she wanted his full attention. "I come back," she said. Her voice was small and very certain. Reed covered her claws with his hands. "I'll be here," he said. She held his face for one more moment. Then she turned and went to Velos, and Velos lifted her with a gentleness that Draven, standing nearby, had not seen in his matriarch in a very long time. Soro settled against her grandmother's shoulder and looked back at Reed over the curve of Velos's neck. She kept looking until the shuttle ramp came up. Reed stood at the edge of the clearing. He stood there as the black shuttle rose, slow and deliberate, into the rust-colored sky. He stood as it grew smaller and then became a point of light and then was gone. Lena came to stand beside him. She had her arms crossed and her eyes on the sky, and she did not say anything for a long time. That was the thing about Lena, she knew, when words were not the right tool. The wind moved dust across the clearing in lazy spirals. Reed put his hands in his coat pockets and kept watching the spot where the light had been. 40 light-years away, in the ancient hall where fires had burned for 3 centuries, Velos sat alone in the evening with a data pad in her hands. On it was a copy of the medical log from a small clinic on a border world. The original was on file in the Empire's permanent record now, archived alongside treaty texts and founding documents, because Orath had quietly ensured that it was, and had not mentioned to anyone that he had done so. She read it slowly. She had read it before, but she read it again. Every temperature check, every feeding note, every small careful decision made by a man who had no training for this and no obligation to stay, and no audience to perform for. She reached the last entry, the one that said, in plain handwriting, "She seems less scared tonight." Velo sat with that line for a long time. In the hall around her, the fires burned the way they had always burned. Everything was the same as it had been 300 years ago, and something had changed in it, not broken, not diminished. Something had been added, a new thing in very old walls. She thought about the question she had asked Reed on that dusty colony world. Why, such a simple question, the simplest one she had asked him, and the only one where his answer had been shorter than she expected. She needed to do the right thing. Not the political thing, the strategic thing, the historically significant thing, the right thing, as if the decision had been that simple, as if the galaxy was that simple, as if the measure of what to do in any situation was just that one question, answered plainly and then acted on. She set the data pad down. She thought that perhaps, in some ways she had not allowed herself to consider in a very long time, it was. Outside the hall's great windows, the stars of 40 systems spread across the dark in patterns that had not changed since before she was born. They did not comment on anything. They did not have opinions. They simply were, burning steadily, present in the way that things were present when they intended to remain. She had given Reed Calloway a name in her language, the kind of person the universe keeps. She thought, sitting alone in her ancient hall with her fires and her stars, that she understood now why the universe kept them. It was not their strength or their ships or their numbers. It was simpler than that, more stubborn than that. They attached, they stayed, they named things they loved. And they kept records. Every hour. Because the patient mattered. Because she was less scared tonight. Because that, apparently, was enough.